Hey guys, probably put this video on our how to do stuff in Japan playlist. It's about tax. Just heard lots of clicks, lots of people turning off this video. Recently there was, actually on the 1st of October, there was a tax increase, consumption tax increase. So those of you who aren't familiar with the joys of consumption tax, it's the tax that's added to things you buy. And it does vary a bit in Japan on what's taxed and what's not, and how much each thing is taxed, and it does vary a bit, but generally we've been paying 8% consumption tax. So when we buy things or pay for things, they add 8% onto it for tax. And the joy of a consumption tax, for those who aren't familiar with it, is that the government can increase it any time they want, and it's really easy for them to administer. So predictably, on the 1st of October, the consumption tax in Japan was raised from 8% to 10%. So naturally, the media and just general anybody at all on the internet love to use things like this as an easy way to get clicks, because they know anything that stirs people up or makes people emotional tends to get a lot of attention. So if you write a story and say Japanese, no, hang on, how were they saying it? They were saying tax hike. Hike is an interesting word to use. Hike gives the impression of something quite large, and people in Japan hit with a tax hike. And there were some other words that were similar too, fairly emotive, dramatic words, right? And because they know that people who are living in Japan, or people who are planning on visiting Japan, if they see a story that says, Japan imposes tax hikes, or people in Japan hit with tax hikes, and other equally emotive words, that they know that people will click on that story and read that story. And then what happens too on the internet, of course, is that people go into the comment section. And the one we looked at this week, there's a number of them we looked at this week, but on Facebook, people click the angry face emoji, and then they get underneath and they all whinge and complain about the tax hike. And I mean, if you're going to write it just factually, you'd say Japan has had a tax increase, or consumption tax in Japan increased, or something like that. That's the facts, isn't it? And all these other dramatic, emotive words that they use are just to get clicks, get attention, get clicks. And because all that matters, if people click the angry face emoji and people comment, and then people, everyone goes on and on about what a bad thing it is, and some people are complaining because recently, bit of bad timing really, because recently Japan bought a whole bunch of new missiles and other things that cost millions of dollars, spent millions of dollars, billions of dollars on missiles and new aeroplanes. They bought F-2 aeroplanes and they spent billions, which, you can understand why that annoys people. When you've got old people in Japan dying during summer because they didn't have air conditioning and it got too hot and they died, and yet people are off spending, the government's off spending money on F-2 fighters and missiles and anti-missiles and drone defences and all sorts of nonsense. So people are emotional about that. So with all these things, probably fair to say, of around the world, the media and people on the internet are all about getting attention, aren't they? But we focus mainly on Japan, and with Japan we see it all the time. And we've talked about it before in our myths about Japan playlist, haven't we? That these guys seem to be more focused on, they tend to take a little bit of truth or a little bit of real stuff and then blow it up. Oh, by the way, just on that too, some of you might have seen a video we made recently about how they'd done a story about on the internet about how Japanese men expect their wives to make dinner. The same guys came up with another statistic that they'd obviously gone looking for, and they found another statistic about the same thing, about the percentage, the amount of time or the amount of hours a week that Japanese men spend doing housework compared with the amount of hours a week that Japanese women spend doing housework, right? Same story again, and again, that's all they focused on, and again, that got lots of angry faces clicked on the story, and it got lots of comments in the comment section, which is, again, exactly what they want. There's nothing better than angry viewers, not angry at the people writing the story, but angry at the topic. They love that stuff because it's controversial, right? And again, they didn't write the whole story. They didn't write that in Japan that there are sort of traditional style roles for husbands and wives, and that the husbands are expected to be at work and make all the money and pay all the bills, right? And so it's a double-sided story, but they never give you the whole story because it's somehow less dramatic, isn't it? If you say Japanese wives spend most of their time doing the housework and Japanese husbands spend most of their time at work bringing in the money, it's not nearly as dramatic a story, is it, than saying Japanese wives spend 20 hours a week doing housework and Japanese men spend an hour and a half or whatever it was, something like that. No surprises there, you know. And again, they've taken some truth that was true, but then they've left out a whole heap of truth that would have given you the whole story, you know. And this tax thing's a bit the same. It is true that they've increased the consumption tax on most things from 8% to 10%, and that is true. But if we look at the big picture again, and this is the thing, none of the people reporting this, or reporting's probably too generous a word, none of the people talking about this or writing about it or being dramatic about it, about, you know, being hit with tax hike people, none of them have mentioned the fact that the cost of living and the quality of living in Japan is actually very good. And for a lot of the foreigners who live here, the value for money that we get is a lot better than the countries that we come from. You know, definitely Australia. The cost of living in Japan is way lower than the cost of living in Australia, and the quality of the goods and services that we have here are excellent. You know, and that's probably fair for most people who live here. And again, people who come visiting here from other countries. So if you're planning on coming here for a holiday, you know, 2%. I mean, most of the food here is comparatively cheap compared with a lot of other big countries. Food, clothes. When you get out of the big cities, accommodation's not so bad. You know, most of the things here that if you come here for a holiday, most of the things that you'll spend money on, you won't feel bad. We know from the people we talk to, you know, our viewers and our patrons and other people who come and visit Japan often tell us about their experiences here, and we know from them they're often pleasantly surprised how cheap everything is. And the people who live here, it's pretty much the same thing. If you look at your cost of living here, it's pretty good. Again, if you live in the middle of Tokyo, it's going to be a bit more harsh. But if you're living outside the main cities, the cost of accommodation and food and clothes and all your sort of month-to-month expenses are pretty good. I mean, the average wage here is pretty low as well, but it's still, you know, most people here can have a relatively new car and a relatively new place to live in, or decent place to live in, and you know, can afford to buy the groceries that they need and go out to dinner. You know, you can go out to dinner. One person can go out to a family restaurant and spend $10 and have a good meal at a family restaurant. So a family can go and spend $20 or $30 and have a good meal at a family restaurant. You know, so if you're thinking of coming to Japan and you hear about the tax hike, you know, and the dramatic, they always manage to put a dramatic image with it, and use lots of emotive words and everything else. And then if you read the comments underneath, that gives you the impression, and because some of the comments are fair too, that, you know, that it's probably not the last time they'll increase it. It's easy to increase it, and they can increase it again easily. So, you know, it's a chance they will increase it again. But in the meantime, if you compare the cost of things in Japan and add another 2%, it's still good. It's still really good. So if you're thinking of coming to Japan, don't give it a second thought. If you're already living in Japan, you'll know what I'm talking about. You know, if you spend $1,000 a month on your living, you know, you'll spend another $20 a month. You know, if you spend $2,000 a month, it'll be another $40 a month, won't it? You know, in the big picture, it's not too bad. It really isn't too bad. Just while we're talking about the tax thing too, and the reason this is going on the How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist is, actually guys, just notice this, there's rice there ready to be harvested, and then a little bit further up here you'll see they've done it the old way. They've cut the rice and hung it up on the old frames, which is the way it used to be done. They wait till it dries and they thrash it and get all the rice out, and then they toss it in the air and get rid of the husks. There it is. So yeah, just while we're talking about this, and the reason it's going on the How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist is that there is no consistency, and we have actually made a video about this before. There's no consistency in the way the prices of things are shown to the customer. So most convenience stores will usually have two prices. They'll usually have, for some strange reason, because they're not tax-free convenience stores. So showing you the price of the item and then the price including tax. So for example, it'll say, well, you know, the sushi places used to say 100 yen sushi, and in actual fact it was 108 yen, wasn't it? Because and the 100 yen shops are the same. The items are 100 yen, but when you come to the checkout, they have been 108 yen, and now they're going to be 110 yen. So the 100 yen shop stuff is actually 110 yen. And the convenience stores will usually have, you know, something's 300 yen, and then it'll have, in bigger writing, you'll have smaller writing, say 300 yen, and then in bigger writing it'll say 330 yen. And it says next to it in Japanese that this is the tax, you know, included price, right? So for most people, even if you can't read Japanese, it's fairly obvious. If there's two prices there, one's 300 and one's 330, you know when you get to the register you're paying 330. So places like the 100 yen shop and the sushi shop and the convenience store, which we're about to stop at, are all fairly easy to understand. However, there are a lot of shops you'll go into, particularly little ones, little sort of, you know, family-owned little shops that don't make it clear, and you can get caught. You can get caught. You can go and see something. Oh, shall I buy this? It's, you know, it's $30. You know, oh, should I buy it? Yeah, okay, I'll buy it. And then you get to the register, and it's actually $33. So you can get caught out. And again, you know, stuff here is pretty cheap usually. So it's not usually a huge deal. It really isn't, if you look at the big picture. But the only reason I'm mentioning that is that it could bother some people if you've worked out how much you've just spent and you get to the register and you find it's actually 10% more. It can bother some people. So be aware of that. That, you know, particularly in a smaller shop somewhere, it's just got one price written on it. It might not include tax, or it might. And that's sort of the point. It's not consistent. It's not consistent. In some countries they have laws about that, right? That the store must show you the total price, including the tax, and in some countries they don't, and in this country they don't. So it's inconsistent. That shop will show the price with tax, that shop will show the price without tax. Which is sort of crazy really, because you have to pay the tax. So this whole faffing around with what the before tax price is sort of irrelevant, isn't it? You know, really it would be great to have a law that just says, just show the one price. That's the price you have to pay at the register. That's what we want to see, isn't it? That's what we want to know. The before tax prices are totally irrelevant to us, isn't it? So, but that's just the way it is. And again, you know, in the big picture, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter unless you come from some country where everything is super, super amazingly, ridiculously cheap. You're going to be, when you come to Japan, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. You know, that what you can buy. You know, this convenience store here, you can go in there and buy a really nice curry meal with salad and all sorts of stuff for about $5 or $6. You know, we've showed you lots. Those who haven't seen it, check out the Food Eating in Japan playlist. You know, if you're coming to Japan, you can budget on $5 a meal and you can eat really well. Really, you know, I mean, if you're on holidays, you want to spend money, you know, you can spend more than that and really, really live well. But, you know, if you're just wanting to sort of keep the cost down and be as stingy as possible, you know, $5 a meal, that's fine. You know, you live really well with that. And the same with the accommodation. You know, we're always showing you hostels and places you can stay that are really cheap. Hotels and workman hotels and, you know, clothes, you know, $10 t-shirts and $15 t-shirts and, you know, electronic goods, and you know, it's very rare in Japan to find something that's really expensive. You know, that compared to other countries, it's really, really good. So any of this talk, this dramatic talk about being, what's that word, slugged? That was the one I was trying to remember. The people in Japan are being slugged with a tax hike. Right? How dramatic does that sound? Being slugged with a tax hike. It sounds much more dramatic than people in Japan have just had a 2% tax increase, which is the facts, right? Being slugged with a tax hike, you know, and then the 2% thing's mentioned down in the body of the story. It's not included in the top. So again, guys, pretty much anything you see about Japan at all, you know, just keep in the back of your mind that there's a really good chance that what you're reading is either going to be 100% nonsense or 90% nonsense, or, you know, at least 50% nonsense. It's really rare for us to come across stuff. People send us stuff all the time, and just because of what we look, because obviously we check all our own videos, and that triggers some algorithm in YouTube, so we're always getting, YouTube's always suggesting videos for us to look at. So we do look at occasional videos from other sources, but we're rarely impressed, because almost always they're really focused on it, getting attention. You know, the general media and the people on the internet, that's what their income comes from, doesn't it? Is how many views they get, and that's all they want. And so writing Japan has a 2% tax increase obviously isn't going to get a lot of clicks. It's not going to get lots of angry faces. It's not going to get lots of comments in the comment section, is it? So that's why they go with the dramatic titles and the story, and not telling you the full story. Because again, it's the same as with the thing about the Japanese housewives and the Japanese husbands. If they give you the whole story there, you know, Japanese has traditional gender roles in that the wives are expected to look after the house and the husbands are expected to go to work. And pretty much, not always the case of course, but pretty much everyone's happy with that here too. No one's complaining about it. There's no ladies sitting at home here with their mamatachi, with their lady friends and their babies, and sitting around the kitchens complaining about their lives, because for them they're comfortable with it. They like it, most of them. And the husbands that are going off to work, pretending to work 60 hours a week, which we talked about previously, they're happy with that too. So everyone's happy. It's like, if you want to know about it, talk to old people that are old like me, right? And people older. Talk to your grandparents about this, and they'll tell you that in most Western countries back in the 50s, it was the same, and everyone was happy. You know, not saying that it should be like that now. Again, it's just facts. It's not trying to stir anyone up with dramatic statements that's saying that way's better. Not saying either way is better. Which is interesting, because the Western perspective is that the old way is no good, isn't it? That's what they're saying. That the women are expected to be cleaning the house, and that's no good. And that's why that story gets angry faces and angry comments. It's because all these people go, expecting the wife to get in the kitchen, that's no good. But that's not actually the truth. Trying to portray that as being a negative thing or a bad thing, okay, you can do that if you want to, but the reality is that's not the way Japanese people see it. They just see it as being a traditional gender role, and they're quite comfortable with it. Not everybody, by the way. We know lots of people where the husband and wife both work, you know, and share the housework and stuff. We know people who do that, but generally speaking, you know, the wives are expected to look after the house and the husbands are expected to pay the bills. And that's just the way it is, you know. And whether you think that's better than the other ways it is in other countries, or whether you think it's worse, or whatever your opinion on whether it's good or bad is up to you. We're not into deciding which is good or bad in this case. We're just saying that's just the way it is. And that if they're going to tell you the story about how it is in Japan, to only tell you half the story about the tax slug without actually saying, hey, it's only 2%, and the cost of living in Japan is actually really good, or to say, only give you half the story and say ladies are expected to do all the housework in Japan and the husbands don't help, and only give you that half the story and not give you the other half. The reason the husbands aren't doing much housework is that they're out 60 hours a week at work, or, you know, pretending to be. They're at work. They're not at home. You know, most of the wives aren't working, and they're at home, and that's why they're doing their housework. and the husbands are at work. Now again, not always the case. There's always exceptions to this. We know ladies that work full-time, we know ladies that work part-time. We know ladies that work full-time and part-time and are still expected to look after the house because their husbands are selfish buggers. We know that too, right? We're not saying that doesn't exist. We're saying that generally speaking, the ladies look after the house, the husbands look after the paying the bills, and most people are happy with that here. You know, in our family, there's lots of relationships like that in our family. No one's complaining about it. They're quite happy. And it works quite well. It works quite well because the ladies are free to do all the kid-related stuff and to be, you know, be home when the kids come home from school and take the kids to school and be there for special events. And, you know, there's a lot of, it works. It does work. So most of them are happy with it. So again, yeah, anything you hear about Japan, guys, assume anything from 50 to 100% of it is total BS. Anyway, there it was. Time to go in and see some really cheap food. Today's actually the first, not sure when you'll be watching this video. Today is the 1st of October, so going inside now and everything will be 2% more expensive than it was last time. Big deal, no big deal. More videos coming soon.